The Only Good Priest. Tom and Scott Mystery, Book 3. Author Mark Richard Zubro. St. Martin's Press, New York. Narrator Eric Aust. Chapter 7. Even though we'd given ourselves extra time, we almost missed Priscilla. We couldn't find a parking space anywhere near the beat representative office of the 23rd District. In Chicago, each police district has a beat representative program. It's sort of like a community relations office with overtones of ombudsman thrown in, as opposed to the bad old days of Chicago police riots. Nowadays, the department is more conscious of the necessity of positive dealings with the non-crime committing sector of the public. We wound up having to park south of Belmont and had to hurry back through the gathering wind. Our plan of attack was simple. Follow Priscilla. All the church leads seemed such dead ends. I wanted to chance chasing her despite any risks, and as small as the possibility was that it would lead to the solution of Father Sebastian's death. Since last night's fiasco, we wanted to be sure she hadn't taken precautions against our following her. Certainly, she'd be cautious, might even have someone follow her to be extra safe. If a shadow protector existed tonight, even if we lost Priscilla, we could follow that other person's to a hiding or meeting place. Through the plate glass windows, we saw the group members standing in small clusters, pulling on winter garments. We hid in the shadows up Aldine. We'd approached down to Cross Alley from Melrose and met no one. Facing due east, we felt the force of rising wind almost directly in our faces. Priscilla stood at the door in what looked like amiable conversation with a uniformed officer. Moments later, she finished pulling on her gloves and strode out the door. She turned north on Halstead. We waited. A minute passed. Scott whispered, "We'll lose her if there's no protector and we don't follow soon." Fortunately, none of the others had walked north. A few waited at the bus stop across the street. Others had scattered in different directions. I began to move forward, but caught myself at the last second. A well-muffled figure stepped from the shadows on the other side of Halstead. The layers of heavy winter clothes prevented identifying it as a male or female. I saw a short person in jeans with glasses under a furry hat who turned north also. "Is that the one?" Scott asked. I shrugged. We were just starting out and already our plan had serious flaws. "We've got to try it," I said. Following turned out to be surprisingly easy. The figure peered carefully from side to side and forward into every shadow, but, fully confident in the role of protector, never looked back. After a few moments of following, I felt much better. We caught occasional glimpses of Priscilla a block and a half ahead. Up Halstead, we went past Addison with a darkened Cubs Park. A few blocks west, glanced in the windows of the 23rd District Police Station, beyond a few gay bars and the bus turnarounds, to where Halstead ends at Grace. There our little parade continued up Broadway all the way to Irving Park with no hesitation. We followed the westward turn down Irving Park. With the wind now at our backs, walking became far more comfortable. At any time, Priscilla could suddenly have taken a car, hailed a taxi, or been joined by a friend. Any of 1,000 possibilities. Fortunately, she walked on. I was determined to keep following until we got whatever information we could get. I knew we didn't have any factual evidence, but Priscilla was right up there with Father Clarence, at the top of my kidnappers list. When we got to Graceland Cemetery, following became more difficult. The south side of Irving Park Road has a chain-link fence and no possibility of concealment. The north side of the street has a brick wall with extremely limited hiding places. We found one spot where the wall jutted out and waited. We saw the protector cross Clark Street. We hurried forward, still staying on the opposite side of the street. The figure passed the Burger King and post office and kept going. On the right up ahead loomed the mass of Lakeview High School. Across from it, on the block between Greenview and Ashland, stood a structure that surpassed the high school in immensity. At the corner of Greenview and Irving Park, the protector gave several last searching glances around. From our hiding place a half block away, we could see clearly on the last few blocks. He or she had been much less careful. After a last look back, the person scuttled down Greenview. We hurried forward. The structure was a huge old church school complex, all interconnected. It took up more than 2/3 of the block. We were in time to see the protector slip through the hedge surrounding the complex. For a moment, an indoor light silhouetted him or her in a recessed opening in the building. Carefully, in case they'd set up observers, we explored the outer perimeter of the structure. It looked to be a church school from the old days when religion was the center of community life. I'd been to enough meetings of gay activist committees and such structures to make a fair guess at the interior from the placement of the windows. The front half consisted of church on the top floor with offices on the ground floor under it. The back half, several stories taller than the vast front, looked to consist of basement and first floor classrooms and a second and third floor auditorium, probably with a stage. I suspected the fourth floor contained a low-ceilinged gym. The outer walls of the complex stood anywhere from 10 to 20 feet inside a thick evergreen hedgerow that surrounded the entire place. Scaffolding at various points, piles of planks, and stacks of bricks, all looking recently used, lay strewn about the open spaces between hedge and building. We carried on a whispered conversation in the alley that separated the complex from the few houses on the rest of the block. "The lesbian radicals from hell meet in a church?" Scott asked. "I don't think it's been a church for a while," I said. "All that construction shit scattered around smacks of rehabbers on the loose. That one corner where the streetlight hit the building full on showed all new window frames. No ugly grill work, no dirty opaque windows. No, this place had been fixed up by somebody with a ton of money. Even you might need an investment group for this kind of shit." I eyed the exterior of the building carefully. "We're going exploring," I said. "I hate that tone in your voice. It tells me you've got a moment of wild inspiration and daring. Usually it means mess, chaos, and deep shit up to our nipples." "Jerry could be in there." "Yeah," he conceded. "Then let's get the police." "Are you serious? Even Frank Murphy, a cop we know who likes us, doesn't buy this shit. And while that Chicago cop may be gay, I don't trust him yet." A dramatic sigh from Scott. "Look," I said, "the place is absolutely dark. They've got to be holed up in some inside room. My guess is, with all the construction crap still lying around, they're in the middle of renovating. We could explore for a week and not run into anybody. We'll hear them or see their lights long before they see us. Besides, Jerry could be in there. I'm going in." "Alarm system?" Scott sounded resigned. "If it's homemade, hopefully my training in Vietnam will be good enough to catch it before we trip it. If it's built in, that's why I have you along." He's a mechanical genius. He fixes the decrepit appliances at my place, does repairs, major and minor, on my old Chevette that I kept even after I bought the truck this year. One time he installed an entire burglar alarm system around my place. I have absolute faith in his abilities. We eased ourselves through the swaying bushes and hurried to crouch behind a stack of tarpaulin-covered 2x4s. A short dash brought us to what must once have been the main entrance to the classrooms. He punched my arm and pointed up. "That's the old alarm," he said, indicating a foot-square box in the dim light. I looked for holes for him to climb up. None that I could see. "Boost me up," he muttered. He wound up, standing on my shoulders. I braced myself against the side of the building to ease some of his weight. I'm 6'3" and in great shape, but at 6'4", he's not a light burden. My shoulders seemed to endure several hours of this agony, while the rest of the universe probably felt a half a minute pass. "Okay," he finally whispered. I crouched down and he dismounted. He rubbed his hands on his jeans. "It's still connected," he announced, "but it hasn't been functional in years. The whole inside is rotted out." Around the building, we crept, looking for an opening in more modern alarms. Amazingly enough, I found the alarm and managed to render it dysfunctional, in an odd way, without any assistance from Scott. The outside of the building had numerous abutments, decorative buttresses, cornices, along with nooks, crannies, and cubbyholes. Peeking around one of these, I lost my footing, stumbled over a board, and with a soft crunch, put my foot through the top of a box. I managed to accomplish this with only a slight thump from the box as my foot caved in the top. That is, if you didn't count the muffled laughter coming from immediately behind me. All right. It may have been funny, but was this the time to laugh, really? I examined the box. Lettering on the outside indicated it contained parts for an alarm system. After a quick inspection, I discovered 3 other boxes with the same lettering, so they'd never hooked up the damn thing. I'd still wrecked a good part of it. I extricated my leg from its trap and melted into the deeper shadows next to Scott. "You're a big help," I muttered, crouching in the shadows. I paused to reconnoiter. By this time, we'd worked our way around 3/4 of the building with no luck at finding an opening. I stood up and managed to bang my head on the bottom of an ancient metal step fire escape. We'd seen several of them, although this was the only one that reached to within 6 feet of the ground. I whispered to him, "My bet is the place isn't wired at all." "Good thing," Scott said. He tapped me on the shoulder and pointed. "While you were doing a ballet with the boxes, I found this, in a dark recess behind a stack of bricks. He'd found a boarded-up window." "So what?" I said. "It's loose," he said. He proceeded to ease the board back. We peered through the gap. No light shone inside, but my eyes were fairly used to the dark by now. What I could see looked barren and empty. We slipped through the opening. It was the dim street lights shining through all the wide new outside windows that made observation possible. An old blackboard on the wall told me this was a former classroom, and we crept forward. We found openings newly made, which would let at least 2 of the old classrooms, plus a washroom, become in the future one spacious and modern suite of rooms. The only appliances for the moment were the range, refrigerator, and dishwasher, all plunked in the middle of a soon-to-be kitchen floor. We crept on. Heaps of 2x4, stacks of paint cans, and other construction paraphernalia lay in almost every room. We had to move carefully to avoid stumbling over it. We must have covered over half the building before we heard or saw anything indicating current habitation. The place was a warren of rehabilitation, waiting for those wealthy enough to be able to borrow in. The nave and choir loft had been turned into one dazzling series of interconnected lofts and staircases, presumably separate apartments or condos, still to be walled off from one another. The whole thing had an Escher-like effect, all bathed in a soft glow of light, lit in by a vast skylight cut into the former church's roof. In broad daylight, it would take a platoon of men hours to explore the entire structure. Even then, there were mysterious dangers and huge possibilities of missing secret hiding places. I whispered this to Scott. "Curb your imagination, big fella," he whispered. "Let's concentrate on what we can see and then get the hell out." On the top floor of the back half of the building, we encountered the darkest sections yet. No extra light leaked through it to guide us. I listened intently, but heard nothing. On hands and knees, we crawled forward. I didn't want any more klutzoid tripping. We came across a tiled floor and wide opening. I entered the space and let my hand rove up the wall. I felt a metal fixture. I guess we were in the shower room section of the old locker room. We found a door opposite the one we entered. I eased it open a crack. Light again, but still faint. But now, for the first time, I heard voices. We crawled through this opening into a room filled with old lockers stacked in piles 8 feet high. We inched across the floor to the further door. A slit of light shone under it, a welcome beacon after the total blackout of minutes before. No question but that the voices came from behind this door. I eased it open a crack. Soft lights and recessed sconces glowed around the old gymnasium. The half of the space closer to us was a wooden parquet floor. In places, you could see the last flecks of paint marking the out-of-bounds lines. The low ceiling must have frustrated anybody trying to throw a full-court pass. 6 people sat at the far end on folding chairs around 2 card tables pushed together. Beyond them, on the floor, just to the right of a pair of double doors, sat a 7th person. Her bulk rested on a mattress. 8 of these lined the far walls. Piles of clothing and shelves made of bricks and boards separated each person's section. Cartons of what looked to be Chinese takeout sat on the card tables around which the 6 clustered. They spoke animatedly and without hurry. The figure on the floor drew my attention. She read by the light of a desk lamp that rested on the floor. She was the ugliest person I've ever seen. Her reddish-brown hair hung in lank strands to her shoulders. It looked as if she hadn't washed it yet this year. She wore a white sweatsuit with frilly yellow flowers bursting on all sides. The sweatsuit clung to the bulges of her figure in a very unflattering way. Her face had the requisite features, but in the oddest shapes and sizes. Coke bottle-thick glasses covered both eyes, over one of which she wore a black patch. Her lips were wide enough to drive a truck on. Her nose tilted off to the right side as if it had been tweaked at an early age and left permanently off-kilter. This had to be Stephanie, whom Monica had described when we talked to her after the break-in at the Gay Tribune. Priscilla sat at the table on her right, sat a slender young woman in jeans and sweater. She was the only one who was the correct size to be the person we had followed. Next to her and opposite me sat a small woman in her mid-50s in a flannel shirt and jeans. The next two women looked to be about college age. Both wore University of Chicago sweatshirts and faded jeans. The one in faded blue had blonde hair mussed into a lengthy flat top haircut. The woman in faded gray wore her long brown hair in a very 50s ponytail. I couldn't make out the person whose back was toward me. The general topic of conversation was their next move. A judge in downstate Illinois had recently ruled against a lesbian in a child custody case. They discussed various acts of violence against her person and property. They switched to an anti-abortion group, the leader of which they suspected of being behind the firebombing of an abortion clinic. Again, they coolly discussed possible means of wreaking violent revenge on them. Nothing about a kidnapped 12-year-old. Suddenly, the woman on the floor snapped her book shut and said, "Everybody stop!" Several people started to ask various forms of, "What's up?" "Hush!" the woman commanded. "We're being watched. I can feel it." "Shit," I said to myself. I wanted to close the door, but didn't want to risk the slightest movement. Priscilla snorted contemptuously. "Stephanie, you've been to one too many tarot card readings. I can't think of a safer place than this." "We're there!" Stephanie screamed, pointing toward the door behind which we crouched. Chairs scraped back, faces turned to us. In the instant before we turned to flee, I saw the face of the sixth person. I thought I recognized Prentice Dwalski, hustler extraordinaire. No time for a second look. "Run!" I said as they started toward us. We tried flying back the way we came. The abrupt appearance of a wall inches from my nose put an end to a mad dash. More cautiously, but as quickly as possible, we tried to move down and out. Within seconds, we'd lost our way. We managed to get out of the locker room area and down to the third floor, but neither of us could remember where the exit was for the next descent. Sounds of those following became sporadically. The darkness hampered them as much as it did us. We came to a dead end and had to double back. We tried doors on every side, new apartments, dead ends with new appliances scattered around to bang into. The obstacles prevented anything like rapid progress. We came to the door through which we'd emerged from above while Scott crept further along. I listened a moment. The sound of squabbling voices came closer. I turned to realize I couldn't see Scott. I started off down the corridor. "Here!" he called about 20 feet ahead and on the right. A window at the far end of the corridor lit in enough light for me to see a door sway in the corridor. "Come on!" Scott urged. I hurried forward. As I got to the door, I turned for a quick glance back. A female figure emerged from the staircase with a flashlight in her hand. The light crept toward us. We slammed the door and dashed forward. We found ourselves in another maze of passages. Sounds of pursuit nearing forced us to danger speed. Through the uncertain light, we blundered and stumbled. Finally, we emerged on a balcony overlooking a vast space above. The new skylight told me we'd entered the nave of the old church. We had sufficient light to see our way down from the balcony. 2 sets of steps on opposite sides led into the abyss below. We heard feet pounding behind us. I glanced down. We could see each level of the unfinished loft as they branched out. A quick look showed no sign of anything below us, cutting off our retreat. We'd have to descend into the maze. "This way," we told each other. Seconds later, I realized he'd gone down the other steps before I could try retracing my way. The door we'd come through burst open. I turned and flew down the stairs. On the second level, I almost boxed myself in. Taking a wrong turn into a master bedroom, I reemerged and glanced quickly around, and on the level above me and across the gaping chasm, I saw a flashlight bobbing erratically from side to side. For an instant, the light caught Scott. "Get him!" a voice screamed. The vast room echoed now in shouting voices and thundering footsteps above me on my side. I heard slower pursuit. No light shone on this side. I rushed to my right and found a grand staircase. I hurried down, then paused at the bottom. I couldn't see an opening that led up to meet up with Scott. "Run!" I heard him shout. He was on a series of steps a level and a half above me. "I'll meet you outside," he gestured frantically and disappeared. Despite his words, I tried desperately to find a way to get up to the other side. In the precious moments I used on this task, my pursuers closed in. "Hold it, asshole." I turned. The heavy-set woman who'd been reading on the floor stood at the head of a contingent of 3, 10 feet in front of me. They blocked the way to a series of steps down. "We got one," she called out. I dashed straight for the closest woman. She flinched for a second, but her foot darted out in a well-aimed karate kick. I'd had similar training and managed to deflect the blow with my right arm. It still hurt like hell, but I managed to shove her as I dove past. She fell into the other two, and I rushed for the flight of stairs behind them. On the ground floor now, I looked for any kind of exit. The doors were locked tight. This section had all new windows. Each had double-thick safety glass that you'd need a truck to burst through. I was far too lost to be able to find the way we'd come in the first time. Behind me, I heard several loud screams and a yodel of triumph. Had they captured Scott? I turned a corner and came upon a pile of window casements. I'd stumbled on the spot where the workmen had stopped putting in new windows that day. I gave the old window a swift look-see, old and opaque. I picked up a board and smashed the glass. Only rusted metal grating stood between me and freedom. Bracing my arms on the window sides, I pounded my foot against it. It gave on the second thunk. With the third, it clattered to the ground. I jumped through, dropped 3 feet to the ground, and ran. I didn't go far. I stopped at the hedge. To look back, the wind howled around me, but as yet no rain or snow fell. A face appeared at the opening I'd created. After searching looks left and right, she disappeared. I stayed still and caught my breath. Then light appeared at the window. I saw Priscilla's face as she flashed the beam around the building's exterior. I crouched unmoving in my hiding place. The beam couldn't penetrate the thick evergreen hedge. Moments later, the light disappeared. I spent the next 30 minutes in 2 painstaking circles around the outside of the building, looking for Scott. I halted when I realized he could be doing the same thing. We could circle each other endlessly. I waited. Time kept by at an achingly slow pace. No sounds came from inside or outside the building. After 15 minutes, I decided to go back in. Scott could be captured, trapped, hiding anything. So far, they hadn't called the cops. Assuming they were the Lesbians for Freedom and Dignity, they'd be reluctant to draw police attention to themselves, especially if they were in residence illegally. For similar reasons, I wasn't eager to call the cops. Carefully, I returned to our original point of entry. Slowly, I eased back the board and listened intently. No sound. I crawled through the opening and jumped the 2 feet to the floor. Instantly, bright light shone in my face. Powerful hands gripped me from all sides, wrenching my arms painfully behind me. They dragged me through the complex. We met Priscilla in the center of the old church under the massive skylight. She took the flashlight from the one called Stephanie and shone it in my face. "Macho Mason," she sneered. She waved the flashlight at the 2 others gathered on her right. "I told you he'd come back for his pal." "Where's Scott?" I asked. She pointed. "Up. We've heard him, but we haven't been able to catch him. We've got the exits covered. He can't get down without getting caught. We figured you'd be back to look for him. We found your entrance and waited." They led me back to the ground level of the loft room. One of the women pulled the belt from her pants and used it to secure my hands behind me. She stepped back. Priscilla placed the flashlight 10 feet away on the railing for the first flight of stairs to the first loft. The diffused light showed 3 women and no Prentice. "What'd you hear upstairs?" Stephanie said. "Fuck you," I said. She kicked me in the nuts. I doubled over and slumped to the ground, groaning in agony. "Answer, or you get more of that," she commanded. Gasping for breath, I waited for the waves of pain and nausea to subside. Breathing under control, I asked, "Where's my nephew?" Stephanie had a gravelly, whiskey voice. Whether natural or acquired, I couldn't tell. She said, "We asked the questions." "We took him," Priscilla said. I struggled to my feet. "If he's harmed in any way, I'll kill you." "Do that," she said calmly, and gave a ripple of laughter. "We've been calling your place to give you a message, but you haven't been home. Leaving a kidnap message on an answer machine is stupid. And Carpenter's number is unlisted." "Why'd you kidnap Jerry?" I asked. "To stop your meddling. We don't need you guys snooping around. As it turns out, our fears were quite well founded. Here you are. And you've heard too much. You're forcing us to unusual action. We can't keep you, and we can't let you go. If we have you, your nephew is expendable." A tremendous bellow split the silence. I looked up in time to see a shape hurtling down. I leaped back. Something landed with a tremendous crash halfway between Priscilla and me. Fragments flew in every direction. I scrambled to the railing, twisted around, and clutched the flashlight in my tied hands. I flicked it off and ran for the stairs. I heard the woman begin to follow. Another bellow split the air. I stopped and looked up. A massive object tipped at a crazy angle from the top loft. I dashed up the stairs. A second later, another crash sounded behind me. From the top of the landing, I looked down. Halfway down, the stairs no longer existed. The woman at the bottom shouted in frustration. Priscilla put a quick stop to that. She issued commands. The group below scattered. One raced up the steps on the other side of the vast space. The other hurried through other openings to pursue paths I couldn't be aware of. I scrambled upward, careful of my balance. With my hands still tied, 2/3 of the way up, I met Scott, coming down. It took only seconds to untie me. We could only use the flashlight sparingly for fear it would alert pursuers to our presence. Even with its help, we wound up in the locker room again. "Shit!" I said. Sounds of pursuit came from the corridor behind. We hurried through the locker room and into the gym. Empty, we raced across the floor and through the double doors. Construction materials lay scattered about a wide entryway. To the left, the corridor ended in 2 opaque windows. Across from us was a solid brick wall. To the right, a wide staircase led down. We paused at the top of the stairs. Voices drifted from below. We raced back to the doors. "We could fight them," Scott said. "I don't like the odds. Remember, Monica said they've all had special training in self-defense." While we gasped these words at each other, we wedged planks against the doors. Someone shoved them from the other side. The planks budged, but held. Then I heard the sounds of people hammering against the doors. "That won't hold long," Scott said. "I haven't seen any evidence of weapons," I said, "but I don't want to take chances. They sounded pretty bloodthirsty earlier." "We'll fight if we have to." Scott ran to the windows. I rushed to the top of the stairs. I heard angry voices and Stephanie's overriding the others. "Priscilla's not here. I'm using the gun on them if we get there before she does." The sound of smashing glass caused me to turn. Scott had a plank accomplishing the same thing I had done earlier. I saw the last shards of glass fall outward. I hurried over. Drenching rain driven by a howling wind greeted my vision. The storm had taken a piss-poor time to break outside the window. One of the rusted fire escapes we'd seen earlier offered us our only chance. At one point, some fool, to keep intruders out, had placed mesh screening over the outer window, violating fire codes and rendering the fire escape useless. 2 blasts of the timber in Scott's powerful arms, and the rusted metal flew into the night. No point in looking back. I couldn't remember exactly, but I hoped this was the fire escape that held together all the way to the ground. I chose not to think of the alternatives. Scott threw the board aside and scrambled onto the metal planking. It squeaked ominously. Quickly, I joined him. The structure groaned. I examined the massive bolts, holding stairs to the building. Not reassuring. The one still in place seemed to be secured mostly by rust and a prayer. I didn't think about what would happen if they gave way. We stood 5 stories above the ground. Below, Hidden in darkness, between folds of the building, was the ground and safety. I still couldn't tell if the damn thing reached all the way down or not. Rain pelted into my eyes and washed over my chin. Scott led the way. Our feet clattered on the railings. Halfway down, I heard voices above. We rushed faster. On the third landing, Scott stumbled. We collided and fell. A shot rang out. "Motherfucker!" Scott swore. We untangled ourselves and sped earthward. They fired only the one shot, the wild dash, and my fear made it tentative. But I thought I heard Priscilla's voice berating someone, probably Stephanie, the gun wielder. Closer to the bottom now, I could see that the fire escape ended 15 feet from the ground. We paused at the edge. I looked up. So far, no one had followed. The structure trembled and groaned under us. "Now what?" Scott gasped. We shut our eyes, click our heels together 3 times, and say, "There's no place like home." "I could do without any cans of shit right now," he said. The fire escape groaned ominously. "Turn backwards," I commanded. "Grab hold of the bottom rung, get your legs over, and let yourself dangle. Swing out hard, jump, and hit the ground rolling. That'll distribute your weight. Less chance of injury." "Right, you first. I'll watch." I turned around, got my feet over the last step, grabbed hold of a railing, and backed up. I eased my knees, then my torso over the edge. For a second, my hand slipped. I grasped the railing, swung once, and again pushed off, and hit the ground rolling. I leaped to my feet. I watched Scott duplicate my efforts, moving backward and swinging out. His feet dangled 4 feet above me. He swung out once. The rail snapped on his back, swinging, and he fell. He landed on me. We lay, limbs entangled, for several startled seconds. Moments later, we were on our feet and running. An angry rumble from the building behind stopped me in my tracks. I watched the ancient fire escape rattle, then crumble in slow stages to the ground. Scott grabbed my arm. "Let's go," he shouted. We ran. We didn't stop until we'd gotten back to the parking lot in front of the Burger King we passed earlier, just west of Clark Street. I wanted to call Frank Murphy before we called the Chicago police. After all, we had entered illegally. We used the payphone to call the River's Edge police station. Frank Murphy wasn't on duty. I got his home number from directory assistance and called. It was just after 1. A very sleepy Frank answered on the 6th ring. When I got it through to him about the kidnapping, he came awake enough to tell me to wait there. He'd handle it. We huddled under the overhang outside the restaurant. Our winter coats had kept out the worst of the rain, but drops fell from my nose and chin as I tried to squeeze the dampness out of my hair. 10 minutes later, a cop car pulled up. We got in the back seat. Our explanation took endless moments before they drove to the church. Maybe they needed to make sure our story confirmed Frank's. At the church, the cops delayed again. We urged a dramatic frontal assault. They claimed they has to wait for backup and permission. We argued about it, intermixed with their fascination with meeting Scott Carpenter. I was never more frustrated with his fame. He, too, tried to get them to move, but to no avail. By the time someone of sufficient rank showed up, it'd be too late. I knew they'd be gone. Frank drove up a few minutes after the first contingent had entered the building. We walked in with him. The rain had stopped and the wind had changed direction. Now, driving with a cold roar out of the northwest through the many levels and corridors, we saw lights flickering. When we got to the top floor, it was as I feared. No one, not even the remains of dinner on the table. All the clothes and sleeping bags had disappeared. The only proofs of our story that remained were the various signs of destruction and the now barren card tables and chairs in the middle of the gym floor. A Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.